I used to work the passenger lift in the Empire Hotel. That big block of buildings and lines of red and white brick like streaky bacon. Stands at the corner of Bath Street. I served my time in the Army and got my discharge with good conduct stripes, and how I got the job was in this way. The hotel was a big company affair with a managing committee of retired officers and such like gentlemen with a bit of money in the concern and nothing to do but fidget about it, and my late colonel was one of them. He was as good-tempered a man as ever stepped when his will wasn't crossed, and when I asked him for a job, "Mo," he says, "you're the very man to work this lift at our big hotel. Soldiers are civil and businesslike, and the public like 'em only second best to sailors. We had to give our last man the sack, and you can take his place." I liked my work well enough and my pay, and kept my place a year, and I should have been there still if it hadn't been for a circumstance, but more about that just now. Ours was a hydraulic lift. None of them rickety things that swung up like a pole parrot's cage in a well staircase that I shouldn't care to trust my neck to. It ran as smooth as oil. A child might have worked it, and safe as standing on the ground. Instead of being stuck full of advertisements like our omnibus, we'd mirrors in it, and the ladies would look at themselves and pat their hair and set their mouths, and when I was taking them downstairs dressed for an evening. It was a little sitting room with red velvet cushions to sit down on, and you'd nothing to do but get into it, and you'd float on up, and you'd float you down, light as a bird. All the visitors used the lift at one time or another, going up or coming down. Some of 'em was French, and they would call the lift a ascenseur, and good enough for them in their own language, no doubt, but why the Americans, that can speak English when they choose, and are always finding out ways of doing things quicker than other folk, should waste their time and breath calling the lift an elevator, I can't make out. I was in charge of the lift from noon until midnight. By the time the theater and dining out folks had come in, and anyone returning later walked upstairs, for my day was done. One of the porters worked the lift till I came on duty in the morning, but before 12 there was nothing particular going on, and not much till after 2 o'clock. Then it was pretty hot work, with visitors going up and down constant, and the electric bill ringing you from one floor to another like a house on fire. Then came a quiet spell while dinner was on, and I'd sit down comfortable in the lift and read my paper. Only I mightn't smoke, but nobody else might neither, and I had to ask foreign gentlemen to please not smoke in it. It was against the rule. I hadn't so often to tell English gentlemen. They're not like foreigners that seem as if their cigars are glued to their lips. I always noticed faces of folks when they got into the lift, for I have a sharp sight and good memory, and none of the visitors need to tell me twice where to take them. I knew them, and I knew their floor as well as they did themselves. It was in November that Colonel Saxby came to the Empire Hotel. I noticed him particularly because you could see all at once that he was a soldier. He was tall, thin man, about 50, with a hawk nose, keen eyes, and a gray mustache. And he walked stiff from a gunshot wound in his knee. But what I noticed most was the scar of a saber cut across the right side of his face. As he got in the lift to go to his room on the 4th floor, I thought, what a difference there is among officers. Colonel Saxby put me in mind of a telegraph post for height and thinness, and my own colonel was like a barrel in uniform, but a brave soldier and gentleman all the same. Colonel Saxby's room number was 210, just opposite the glass door leading up to the lift. And every time I stopped on the 4th floor, number 210 stared me right in the face. The colonel used to go up in that lift every day regular, though he never came down in it but I'm coming to that presently. Sometimes, when we was alone in the lift, he would speak to me. He asked me what regiment I served, said he knew the officers in it, but I can't say he was comfortable to talk to. There was something stand-off about him, and he always seemed deep in his own thoughts. He never sat down on the lift. Whether it was empty or full, he stood bolt upright under the lamp, where the light fell on his pale face and scarred cheek. One day in February, I didn't take the colonel up in the lift, and as he was regular as clockwork, I noticed it. But I supposed he'd gone away for a few days, and I thought no more of it. Whenever I stopped on the 4th floor, the door to 210 was shut, and as he often left it open, I made sure the colonel was away. At the end of the week, I heard a chambermaid say that Colonel Saxby was ill. So I think that's why he hadn't been down the lift lately. It was a Tuesday night, and I'd had an uncommonly busy time of it. It was a stream of traffic up and down, and so it went the whole evening. It was on the stroke of midnight, and I was about to put the light in the lift, lock the door, and leave the key in the office for the man in the morning, when the electric bell rang sharp. I looked at the dial and saw I was wanted on the 4th floor. It struck 12 as I stepped into the lift. As I passed the 2nd and 3rd floors, I wondered who it was who rung so late, and I thought it must be a stranger that didn't know the rule of the house. But when I stopped on the 4th floor and flung the door open to the lift, Colonel Saxby was standing there wrapped in a military cloak. His room door was shut behind him, for I read the number on it. I thought he was ill in bed, and ill enough he looked, but he had his hat on. And what could a man that had been in bed 10 days want with going out on a winter midnight? I don't think he saw me, but when I'd set the lift in motion, I looked at him standing under the lamp with the shadow of his hat hiding his eyes, and the light full on the lower part of his face that was deadly pale, the scar on his cheek showing still paler. "Glad to see you better, sir." But he said nothing. I didn't like to look at him again. He stood like a statue with his cloak about him, and I was downright glad when I opened up the door to let him step out into the hall. I saluted as he got out, and he went past me towards the door. "The colonel wants to go out," I said to the porter who stood staring. He opened the front door, and Colonel Saxby walked out into the snow. "Now that's a queer go," said the porter. "It is," I said. "I don't like the colonel's looks. He doesn't seem himself at all. He's ill enough to be in bed, and there he is, gone out in a night like this. Anyhow, he's got that famous cloak to keep him warm. I say he's going to a fancy ball and got that cloak to hide his dress," said the porter, laughing uneasily, for we both felt queerer than we cared to say. And as we spoke, there came a loud ring at the doorbell. "No more passengers for me," I said. I was really putting out the light this time when Joe opened the door, and 2 gentlemen entered, and I knew at a glance they were doctors. One was tall, and the other short and stout, and they both came onto the lift. "Sorry, gentlemen, but it's against the rules of the lift to go up after midnight." "Nonsense," said the stout gentleman. "It is only just past 12, and it's a matter of life and death. Take us up at once to the 4th floor." And they were in the lift like a shot. When I opened the door, they went straight to number 210. A nurse came out to meet him, and the stout doctor said, "No change for the worse, I hope?" And I heard her reply, "The patient died 5 minutes ago, sir." Though I'd had no business to speak, that was more than I could stand. I followed the doctors to the door and said, "There's some mistake here, gentlemen. I took the colonel down in the lift since the clock struck 12, and he went out." The stout doctor said sharply, "It's a case of mistaken identity. It was someone else you took for the colonel." "Begging your pardon, gentlemen, it was the colonel himself, and the night porter that opened the door for him knew him as well as me. He was dressed for a night like this, his military cloak wrapped around him." "Step in and see for yourself," said the nurse. I followed the doctors in the room, and there lay Colonel Saxby, looking just as I'd seen him a few minutes before. There he lay, dead as his forefathers, and the great cloak spread over the bed to keep him warm that would feel heat and cold no more. I never slept that night. I sat up with Joe, expecting every minute to hear the colonel ring the front doorbell. Next day, every time the bell for that lift rang sharp and sudden, the sweat broke out on me and I shook again. I felt as bad as I did the first time I was in action. Me and Joe told the manager all about it, and he said we'd been dreaming, but, said he, "Mind you, don't talk about it, or the house will be empty in a week." The colonel's coffin was smuggled into the house the next night. Me and the manager and the undertaker's men took it up in the lift, and it lay right across it, not an inch to spare. They carried it into number 210. While I waited for them to come out again, a queer feeling came over me. The door opened softly, and 6 men carried out the long coffin straight across the passage and set it down with its foot towards the door of the lift, and the manager looked round for me. "I can't do it, sir," I said. "I can't take the colonel down again. I took him down at midnight yesterday, and that was enough for me." "Push it in," said the manager, speaking short and sharp. And they ran the coffin into the lift without a sound. The manager got in last, and before we closed the door, he said, "Mole, you've worked this lift for the last time, it strikes me." And I had, for I wouldn't have stayed on at the Empire Hotel after what had happened, not if they doubled my wages, and me and the night porter left together.